Good evening and welcome to the Book Show. Tonight I'll be talking to Kevin Chapman of Upstart Press, as well as looking at a couple of spectacular new books for foodies.
Ottolenghi, the new Ottolenghi, plenty more. I should mention, when we're talking about food, that there is also the new Unbakery, it's called. It's the new book, or the first ever book from Little Bird, which is the raw food cafe, and incredibly popular, just up Ponsonby Road, not far from my bookshop. Very, very popular. So there's lots of cookbooks coming out.
There are. Vegetarians are being well looked after, aren't
they? They are indeed. The other things that are arriving and flying out the door as well. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari, and Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. And of course, Naomi Klein is an authority highly respected. And we, as a race, sapiens, we need to take notice of what she's saying in this book. And of course, later in the show, I will be reviewing the wonderful new Ian McEwan, The Children Act. Now, you mentioned to me something about hardbacks in vast quantities.
Well, yes. Tomorrow, Super Thursday, they're calling it, in London, 315 new hardback books are all being published on the one day. Some of Britain's leading authors, and this is all getting ready for the Christmas market.
That's an extraordinary number of hardbacks. So they deliberately release them all on the same day, is that right?
Yes, it's a big promotion. It's the first time they've done it, and all the publishers have got together with the booksellers and they've decided this is quite a spectacular thing to do.
Right.
All sorts of people, you know, there's John Cleese, the Hairy Bikers, Jacqueline Wilson, all sorts of wonderful writers.
And they're all involved in the promotion.
They are.
Now that's interesting because we're going to be talking to people from the book trade. You're going to talk to
Kevin Chapman, yes, from Upstart Press.
Right, and I will talk to Jenna Todd, who's a bookseller, and Jenna's also going to do a review for us on this program.
Oh, good. Kevin, you started your publishing life in a small family-owned university press type publishing company in provincial New Zealand. You went on to enjoy a long and distinguished career in the multinational publishing world, both in New Zealand and overseas. And now you've gone full circle and you're starting up your own small publishing company, New Zealand Publishing Company. Give us a brief outline of your career and how it is that you're starting over.
Well, when I left the army, I was in Palmerston North and I did two things. I started going to university part-time and started working at Dunmore Press, which had been started by my wife and her father. When I finished my masters, we decided to sell the press and go overseas. Not necessarily to work in publishing, but 85, I think we went to London, and I ended up as a marketing director for what was then Collins before it became HarperCollins. And then in 89, we realised an ambition and emigrated to Canada. And I was appointed as sales and marketing vice president for one of the biggest Canadian-owned publishers, General Publishing. And I was there for 3 years, and then I went back to the UK and worked for a packager, Andromeda, in Oxford. Then I went back to Canada and worked for what's now Simon & Schuster Canada. Then I went down to Melbourne for a little while and worked for a company called CIS Publishers. Then I went back to Canada and went back to my old position at General Publishing, but I also took over our US business, which was called London Bridge, which existed to import British books into the US. So I basically worked out of Toronto, but I had an office in New York as well. And then in 98, the managing directorship of Hodemar Beckett came up, and I came back, and that morphed into Hachette, and I was there for 15 years. But as you know, last year Hachette made the decision to trim that from a full service company to a sales and marketing operation, which I carried out, and then I thought, well, I don't know what else to do but publish, so I started a publishing company.
Right. You made yourself redundant, as it were, and then you thought, what am I going to do now? Start publishing books again.
Pretty much.
There's been a fair bit of doom and gloom around about the future of book publishing, but you're obviously one of those that still believes there's a bright future for the book.
Oh, I think so. I think the pattern overseas has shown that certain types of books are doing very well, especially non-fiction and children's. In print, fiction is leaning towards digital. It's becoming harder to publish fiction because it's either big or it's tail. The internet, both internet retailers of printed books and digital books have made it harder to publish mid-list. but there's no doubt that you can still sell a lot of books when you get it right.
Just what midlist? This is a trade term. Just define midlist for us.
Well, it's really the smaller print run, steady selling type of books that we used to do. We would do 2,500 to 5,000 of, and they would be sold largely at the behest of passionate booksellers. They're the sort of books that fill out a list from the big titles that you would call your bag openers, your lead titles.
Right.
And it's just getting harder to publish them.
You've been going almost a year now as Upstart Press, and you have published some fiction as well. Tell us about some of the books that you've published so far in this first year.
I started out with two Buzzy Bee children's books by Joy Cowley, and a novel by Paddy Richardson, who's a writer I've long admired. We've published. We're just about to publish Donovan Bixley, a new picture flat by Donovan Bixley. Tomorrow we publish a number of new titles. Robbie Deans, a new a final, I think, Essential Footrot Flats. Paul Thomas's novel we published, which you have. So we'll have published 14 titles by the end of the year, and it looks like we're going to publish about 20 next year.
Oh, well done. Yeah. I guess you're about to head off to the Frankfurt Book Fair. Kevin, you're a veteran, of course, of this fair. It is the biggest single book event in the world, isn't it? Tell us something about the book fair and what you hope to achieve.
Well, you're right, it's massive. It's very hard to put into New Zealand terms, simply because if you think of an extremely large exhibition hall, there are about 10 of them, although the book fair uses, I think, 6 or 7. It attracts over 200,000 visitors, and basically, as a publisher and as an international publisher, the New Zealand Publishers Association takes space in Hall 8, and we go in there on Wednesday morning, and we basically sit there all day and have appointments until it quietens down on the weekend, and then we clear out on Monday. But it is an intense time because you're always selling, even in the evenings when you're out drinking, you tend to be always selling to people. But it is a marvellous environment of collegiality, because publishing is a collegial business.
Right. I mean, it's so what you're selling is foreign language rights and New Zealand titles?
Foreign language rights, or I'm seeing some Australians, some British, some Americans, and foreign language titles. Yeah, we've sold 4 books so far this year, so we're feeling.
Oh, well done. Yeah. Upstart Press. It's a great title, I think. How difficult was it to come up with a name, and where did the idea come from?
Originally it was going to be called Happy Mana Press, because Happy Mana is the Maori version of Chapman, and it also means good quality hops, so that seemed like a propitious name. And I was talking to a friend in Germany who said, what does Happy Mana mean? And I thought, well, I can't have a company name if I'm dealing internationally that everybody starts questioning me about. So we went back to just calling it Startup, and I just looked at it at some stage and thought Upstart, because there are times internationally when you work in New Zealand that you feel like everybody looks slightly down on you, and that you're a bit of an upstart. I was at a big international group meeting in London once, and I spoke out about publishing non-fiction, and somebody came up afterwards and made a denigrating comment, and I thought, you really do think we're upstarts, don't you? So it seemed like a good name.
I think it's an excellent name. I interviewed one of your authors, Paul Thomas, on this program last week. I mean, he's the author of Fallout and the 5th book in the Tito Ihaka series. You also mentioned Paddy Richardson there, also a very fine crime writer.
Yep.
Is this a coincidence that you're going especially into crime fiction, or is it a deliberate move on your part?
Well, certainly for many years I was quite outspoken within publishing circles on the lack of commercial fiction being published in New Zealand. I felt that both publishers and booksellers had ghettoised fiction by only publishing literary fiction. So if I was ever going to publish fiction, it was always going to be commercial, because there are plenty of outlets for literary fiction. Paul Thomas, Hodemar Beckett had published the first 3, so we published Death on Demand. So I had a relationship with Paul, and I was always likely to. Paddy I met when we were guest of honour at Frankfurt in 2012, and she was part of our delegation to the Leipzig Book Fair in March of 2012. So when she came to me and said she was interested in moving publishers, I was only too pleased to publish her. So I mean, they're both fine writers. And next year we have a Greg McGee novel, a complete departure though. It's not a crime novel.
Mm. Well done. All the very best, Kevin. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
So the extraordinary Ian McEwan has done it again. His latest book is The Children Act. He has commented recently on the very large size of some recent novels, including our own Eleanor Catton's The Luminaries, of course, and Graham Beattie's commented on that on an earlier show of ours. This one is concise. He has deliberately refined it and drawn it down into its essence. And it's an extraordinary book based on a law case. The main character is Fiona. Fiona May is a woman lawyer. She is a High Court judge and particularly works in the area of family law. And there's quite a lot in here about family law, and I was actually talking to a New Zealand family lawyer, a woman who said that the details in here about family law and what goes on in the courts is absolutely accurate. So he's done his research and he's bang on. It's very, very gripping. She is a very intelligent, very clever, highly respected woman. She prides herself on her self-containment, her fairness, her good judgments, but right at the very beginning of the novel she's completely thrown because her husband of many years, they're just about to turn 60, the pair of them, has told her that he wants to have an affair. And there's a lovely line where she says she even knows the name of the young woman, a 28-year-old woman. Her name is Melanie, and it has similarities to a certain form of fatal skin cancer. So Ian McEwan, she gets involved in a particular case that the details are in here of this one case where there's a young boy who has leukemia, and he is refusing to take blood transfusions because he and his parents are Jehovah's Witnesses. She goes to visit this young boy in the hospital, which is an unusual thing for the judge to do, but she wants to be sure she's making the right decision. The scene where she visits him is exquisite. He is clearly very ill. She treats him with great intelligence. He's a beautiful, very intelligent boy of 17, and he's been writing lots of poetry. There's paper and poems spread all around his bed, and he's been learning the violin. And Fiona thinks that's interesting. Learning an instrument, he's only been learning it for 4 weeks, while you think you're dying, is actually an act of positive hopefulness. And she gets him to play the violin, and he plays down by the Sally Gardens, and she sings. It is a most extraordinary scene, a very moving scene, and one that completely stayed with me. This marvellous scene of this judge singing while this boy plays the violin in a hospital bed. That scene then becomes pivotal in the story, and the tenderness that develops between them, which she doesn't fully understand the significance of, I think, is crucial. It has an extraordinary ending. She's caught between these wonderful judgments that she's making with great care and diligence and the chaos that's going on in her private life. The ending is amazing. It's taut, it's controlled, it's beautifully written, and I highly recommend it. Ian McEwan at his best. Welcome, Jenna. You're from Time Out Bookstore in Mount Eden, and I'm from the Women's Bookshop in Ponsonby Road. So I thought we should have a little chat about independent bookstores.
I think that sounds like a great idea.
Now, you went to the States at the beginning of this year as on a scholarship, I think, and you made some interesting discoveries about the indies in America.
Yes, I went to America on the Kobo Booksellers Young Bookseller Scholarship, and I went to the American Booksellers Conference in Seattle.
Right.
And so what happened was we spent 4 days talking with other booksellers from all over America and around the world, talking about independent bookstores and book selling, and then I spent 1 week working in a bookstore in Seattle.
Fantastic
Yes.
experience.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yes.
So what did you discover really about the state of independent bookshops?
Well, I think in America they're thriving. They're doing really well. They had a very, very tough time over the recession, as we know, and we had it here too. But there is an upswing of people wanting to shop indie, supporting their community, and people seem really excited, are expanding their businesses, and that made me very excited too.
And that's happening in New Zealand a bit too. Don't you think that the good small independents are actually not just surviving, we're thriving?
I completely agree. It's just, I'm so happy with how we've been doing, and there was a bit of a dip with the recession and everyone got a bit worried, and now we're rising up again, and it's just really wonderful. It makes me feel so happy about how people support their community and see it as a valuable thing.
And buy local and
Buy local, cultivate your community,
Right.
and those are the messages that Time Out really want to give to our customers, and they're really working on that. I think it's great.
And I think the women's bookshop is too, and of course shops like Unity Books here in Auckland and in Wellington. Between us all, we're doing a really good job, and I think we can offer a service that chain stores can't offer, and that certainly the internet can't offer.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think we get that personal opinion that, and people want to come and speak to you or to me or my fellow colleagues.
Yes.
What are you reading next? And we can tell them what the internet cannot tell them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and the staff are all readers. In those good independent bookshops, we're all readers. There's also this guy Mark Forsyth who wrote the Etymologicon and all sorts of other wordy books about books and language and words and so on. He's written this little essay called The Unknown Unknown, and what he's basically saying it's about bookshops. He says independent bookshops and the delight of not getting what you wanted. And what he's really saying is that if you're going to buy a book online, you have to know what you're putting in the search box.
Yes, yeah.
So you know from the beginning what you're looking for. Whereas the joy of going into a really good bookshop, and he says, also makes the point that we are curators. So we not only choose the books that are going to be in our shop, we choose to keep out the bad books, which are all over the internet, of course. And the joy of a small independent bookshop is you go in and you make that discovery of something you didn't know about. So it's that unknown unknown. You didn't know what you wanted until you found it. A great discovery in an independent bookshop.
Well, that's what our buyers do, is we work really hard to make sure that someone, as soon as they see this book, they didn't even know it existed.
Right.
They think, I have to have this now, as well as my new Ian McEwan and my new Murakami, and come out with a little pile, shaking their head, feeling a bit guilty, but very happy at the same time.
Yes, because they've got the unknown unknown,
Yes.
the thing they didn't know they wanted
Yes.
until they actually came upon it, and it's this magical sort of happening. And so bookshops continue to thrive and be important.
Yes, and I think, but we still need to work very hard to thrive, and our customers need to keep supporting us, and if we keep working together, it's just going to be brilliant
I agree.
from here on.
I
Yes.
agree. Great. Now you've brought with you a book that you want to review for us.
I do.
So tell us about it.
Well, there's so many great books coming out this year from really big authors. So I wanted to review a quieter book that I was handed to by my Random House rep. She said, Jenna, this is your next favourite book, and
Great.
and she got it right. It really was wonderful, and I've passed it on to the staff, and we loved it. One of my favourite books is The Orphan Master's Son by Adam Johnson.
Right, yes.
I really like David Mitchell. I really like Murakami, and I feel like this book sits within this genre.
Right.
So Susan Barker, she's a British author, and she's from her dad is from the UK and her mother is Malaysian Chinese, and most of her books are set in Asia. So this is her third book. It's the first one I've read, The Incarnation. So this is about a taxi driver called Wang. It's 2008. The Sydney Olympics the Beijing Olympics are about to start, and he just lives this quiet life. He's quite a depressive character, and he drives around, has a wife and a daughter. He starts getting these letters that are tucked into the flap of his wind visor and sun visor in the taxi.
Does he not know how they get there?
He doesn't know how they get there.
Fascinating. Yeah.
This person who's writing these letters tells him that they are his soulmate, and they have lived 5 previous lives together, and this is their last life
So
together.
the incarnation.
The incarnation.
Right.
So while he's trying to figure out what this, who's writing these letters, and because this person is watching him, so he knows they're in his life somehow, they're also giving him, writing down the past lives that they've had together in the different types of over 1,000 years of Chinese history. So you read the story of this taxi driver as well as these 5 points in Chinese history through different dynasties, and Genghis Khan and the Tang dynasty, and with eunuchs and things.
So it's like 5 separate stories within the one book in terms of Chinese history.
Yes, yeah. So you sort of you read a bit about him, and then you start a new chapter, and it's about it goes back in time, and so his relationship with the soulmate is different in every incarnation. So sometimes they're enemies or lovers or related, and so it's thrilling. And because you really want to know who the soulmate is, it just keeps you going right to the end. I
Right.
just thought it was fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, you had just told me that you were going to review this book, and I haven't read it yet. And a customer walked into the women's bookshop yesterday and said, "I've just read this amazing book called The Incarnations."
Oh,
and I
that's
said, "Right,
fantastic.
look, because we've got it in stock as well." And I said, "Well, you know, Jenna from Time Out has just been raving to me about it, and she's going to review it on the book show." So it's one that we highly recommend then to
Yes,
customers.
yeah. Well, I must say that when you go back in time, the stories are very brutal, and
Right.
there's some brutal violence in there, which didn't put me off, but I can see how it would put some people off. But I think if you've read Murakami, you've read David Mitchell, The Sun by Philip Meyer, that it's real. It's these things that happened, and you cringe a bit, but you have to keep on reading.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds as though you're really hooked into it.
Oh,
once you're in-
completely.
yeah.
And then I gave it to all of our staff, and it's one of those, because, you know, and it's really hard to get everybody to read one book because we're trying to cover them all.
But also you have different tastes as well. Yeah.
Definitely. But we've all read this and really, really enjoyed it, and our customers have really enjoyed it too.
So that's a fantastic recommendation. So
Yes.
it's from Random House, and it's $37, and it's in the bookshops now.
It is, it is. It's in the bookstores. We're selling truckloads of them. I think that could be that secret surprise for your for someone who's never heard of the author, but they read it and they think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much,
Thank
Jenna.
you. Thank you.
Yotam Ottolenghi is an Israeli chef, cookery writer and restaurant owner. His father was Italian-born and his mother German. He moved from Israel to London in 1997, and now arguably he's presently the hottest chef cookery writer in the world, with his eponymous chain of London restaurants, 2 television series, numerous magazine columns and his spectacular cookbooks. When his Plenty was published to enormous success 4 years ago, it broke boundaries, bringing inventive vegetarian cookery to a much wider audience with its emphasis on flavour, original spicing and freshness of ingredients. Ottolenghi is now regarded as one of the most innovative creative chefs and food writers in the food world, and the publication of Plenty More, his new book, is a major publishing event. It picks up where Plenty left off, with more inspiring vegetable-based dishes. The chapters this time are organised by cooking method: grilled, baked, shimmered, cracked, braised, mashed and so forth, and the range of sweet and savoury recipes is stunning. The author had this to say at the launch of his book, and I quote, "In Plenty More, I have aimed to capture some of the techniques involved in constructing a dish, in putting together components and arranging them in layers of flavour, texture and colour. If Plenty, through its structure and recipe selection, tried to shed light on groups of ingredients, my favourite ingredients, this book takes these favourites adds a few more, and then focuses on their cooking techniques and methods that best utilise their potential, unquote. The recipe in particular that I can't wait to make, and I'll be doing this as soon as the broad bean season starts in the next week or two, is broad bean spread with roasted garlic ricotta. Yum. I'm not a vegetarian, neither is Ottolenghi, by the way, although I read once where he was described as the man who sexed up vegetables. So although not a vegetarian, there are many vegetarian dishes I enjoy, and there are over 150 hugely appealing dishes in this bold and truly beautiful cookbook that I'm sure will inspire and delight many. It has certainly delighted me. It's nothing less than a treasure. This next book is a real doorstopper of a book, and it's the latest in a series of which I already own 1001 books, 1001 foods and 1001 wines. They're all great fun. This new one, published by Cassell just last week, runs to almost 1,000 pages and is compiled by London-based freelance food and travel writer Jenny Linford, and it's a most attractive and appealing addition to this series. She has used food writing experts from around the world to select and write about the restaurants. She's divided the world into 5 regions: the Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, Oceania. And yes, we are represented with 13 New Zealand entries written by the highly respected food writer Lorraine Jacobs. I noted that I had been to 8 of the New Zealand listings, so I placed the others on my list of places to eat when next near their locations. I've also been to 9 of the Aussie entries, as well as a handful of others in the UK, New York and Paris. I don't like my chances of making the 1001 in the book before I die, but it is great fun reading about them and of course and of dreaming of making a visit. The featured restaurants are all iconic, selected for their standard of their cooking and also their atmosphere, ambience and setting. There are wonderful colour illustrations of all of them throughout the book, and the book would be rather too heavy to carry internationally, so you need to do your research from it before heading away from New Zealand. Well, that's the show for this week. Thanks for joining us.
Graham, I'm looking forward to tasting your broad bean recipe.
I am too.
Next week's show, I'll be talking to Stephanie Johnson, a local author, and we'll also have another guest reviewer. Look forward to seeing you then.